If you've been following the same training and nutrition advice as everyone else, but getting wildly different results, your genetics might hold the answer. But here's what most people don't realize. Your DNA doesn't just influence whether you'll be good at sports or prone to certain diseases. It might reveal how your body responds to specific macros, how it recovers from training, and whether you're predisposed to store fat or build muscle more efficiently. My guest today has analyzed over 2.5 million genetic variants for more than 200,000 people. He's going to reveal what your genetic blueprint might tell you about optimizing your physique. You'll discover the specific genes that may influence your body's response to training and nutrition, learn how to interpret genetic data without falling for overhyped marketing, and find out whether personalized health based on your DNA is the next revolution in health science. Welcome to Wits and Weights, the show that helps you build a strong, healthy physique using evidence, engineering, and efficiency. I'm your host, Philip Pape, and today we are going to examine whether your genetic code can unlock better results from your training and nutrition. My guest today is Joe Cohen, founder and CEO of SelfDecode, a DNA and biomarker-based health platform that uses AI to deliver personalized health insights. Joe has spent years battling brain fog, inflammation, and fatigue through self-experimentation, and he claims to have optimized over 400 lab markers. His platform has analyzed genetic data for over 200,000 people, and he currently takes 170 supplements daily based on his genetic profile. Today, you're going to learn which variants might influence muscle building and fat loss, how to identify legitimate genetic insights from marketing hype, and whether personalized nutrition based on your DNA can give you an edge in achieving your physique goals. Joe, thanks so much for coming on the show, my man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I want to start talking about the industry first and then drill down to the specifics here. I think you've said that most of the DNA health companies, and I know there are a lot out there, I get pitched all the time to be on my show, that they're essentially scams, I think is the word you've used. And I want to understand like what makes that the case and what differentiates what people should be looking for from those companies.
Yeah, so genetics is a very complex thing. And typically most things that we have are what's called polygenic, which means there's a variety of genes that are related to it, variety of pathways or a variety of genes. And there's different ways of looking at genetics, but essentially what has been found is that typically there's millions of variants that contribute to a condition or any trait. Typically, if it's intelligence, it's not just, you don't have like an intelligence gene or a variant. It's typically, there's many, many variants that are related to it. And, and some of these things are not fully decoded, but, what we do know is that there's millions of variants or thousands or hundreds of thousands that are typically related to these polygenic traits. Some things are like just very specific variants, like, for example, lactose intolerance. Could be like 1, 2, 3, a couple variants related to that. But most things are actually quite polygenic, which means that there's a lot of genes that are related to it. That means is if you're looking at, 100 SNPs or variants, then you're not going to be able to tell or predict something that is related to millions of variants or hundreds of thousands. It's just, there's not enough information. And so what these companies typically do is they'll look at one variant and they'll tell you, you have a high risk for this, or you are like this, or you need this, or you need that. They make broad conclusions based on specific variants. And what they're doing is they're treating it like almost like a lab test. Like you get your LDL cholesterol tested, you have this gene. Now you got to treat this gene and do this, that, and the other thing, whatever, right? Like the problem is that you have 200 million SNPs. So you're not going to you've got these, there could be 20,000 SNPs that make you more likely for something and 10,000 that make you less. And you kind of have to figure out based on all that information, what is the total likelihood? Like how likely are you to get this condition? And it's not yes or no. It's like, are you in the 80th, 90th percentile? Is your risk of getting the condition, maybe in a population, it's 1% of people who are have a condition. And even if you're 5 times the risk, you're 5%, right? So it's not just yes or no. Do you have this, right? And so there's different kinds of genetics. When you want to predict stuff, the only way to do it is through polygenic risk scoring. And then you get, so we'll just focus on this for a second, this polygenic risk scoring area. There are some companies, very few, that do polygenic risk scoring for consumers. But then the problem is that if they don't actually do legit polygenic risk scoring, meaning they might just look at multiple variants, but then they're not doing it legitimately. They might look at 2, 3, 5, sometimes 30, whatever, but they don't. If it's not like a legitimate approach, then it's not very good. Now, even if they did look at many, whatever they're looking at, you want to validate that you're able to predict something.
Mhm.
A lot of genetics is about prediction. You get a test because you want to try to predict something in the future, or you want to try to predict anything, maybe what supplement you'll do well with or whatever. So if you're trying to predict some kind of condition or some kind of tendency, and these things have many genes, it's not just enough to say that you came up with an algorithm that can combine many thousands of variants or whatever and give you use AI and machine learning and give you a result. You actually have to validate it. And that's why even with these LLMs like ChatGPT, they have this war with each other where each of them, but at the end of the day, there's some kind of standard that they test against, and then they kind of compare each other. How good are they at reasoning and different kinds of things, different areas? And so the same thing should happen in genetics, but it's not for consumer genetics. It's just the Wild West where, you just say like whoever has the best marketing is essentially winning the race,
Yeah.
because a guy like who's not an expert, basically anybody who has a podcast about anything is not an expert in genetics typically, right? And you could get on a podcast, whether it's Andrew Huberman or even Peter Attia, and the guy, they don't really know. Peter Attia already, like, he did recommend SelfDecode, but he wasn't fully understanding. He didn't fully understand genetics, and he just kind of knew that you do need to look at more variants. He just didn't really dig himself deeply into it enough. But he said, based on what I could figure out, SelfDecode seems like the best one, right? And he was pretty honest about that. But the idea is that he doesn't know, Huberman doesn't know. You take like any top health influencer, they don't know. And Huberman was once kind of promoting Inside Tracker, which they don't have good genetics software, right? It's just not valid. It's not accurate. It's not valid. It's not good. I think Inside Tracker has moved a little bit away from genetics, but I'm just giving you an example of somebody like Huberman who's not going to understand. He's a neuroscientist. It's a completely different science, and it's not something like you could just have a PhD even in nutrigenomics and understand this kind of polygenic risk scoring. You need to be a bioinformatician, statistical genetics. It's kind of like a different field. And so what we see is that people who don't know what they're doing in the health space trying to get into genetics, and the result is garbage.
Yep.
But some of these people are skilled marketers, like the 10X people. There's some other people, right? Like, they're good at sales. Grant Cardone doesn't know the first thing about anything related to science, but he's a good salesman. So he doesn't need to know. It's, same with Gary Brecka, doesn't know anything about genetics, but he's a great salesman, and he can like look at somebody talking about hydrogen water and be able to formulate some sentences that sound good, but he doesn't know anything about genetics. Yet he's selling a genetic test as if this guy's the expert in genetics.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, you're preaching to a big choir here, because like the tagline of this podcast is skeptics of the fitness industry. You don't even have to get into AI, informatics, genetics to see that kind of extrapolation from data to make wild conclusions and fearmonger things, right? Because it goes viral, it gets clicks, it gets attention.
Exactly.
And you see so much misinformation. That's why I wanted to have you on. I've had a few other folks in this space on, and I understand it's like a very emerging field. And what you just said, like garbage in, garbage out, if the data is not actionable, not only can you not do anything with it, it's useless, but I think it could also lead to, unintentional actions and fears and, oh my God, I'm at risk for this thing. And like you said, it's 500% higher risk, but that's relative to a 0.1% risk in the population. So it's all relative. I think all of that's important, which is why I wanted to start there. Because then the question is, okay, if people are like, I've optimized for my system in my life, my fitness system, the basics, I'm training, I'm eating my protein, I'm moving around, and I'm doing things like that, and I'm tracking, right? We talk about tracking all your lifestyle metrics, the things that you can easily do with like a smartphone. And they want to go to that next level. That's where I think some of these interesting avenues like genetics come in. I've personally had tests done, and you're right. Sometimes they will just take a single snip and say, okay, you're a carb burner. And I'm like, what is this? Like, how does that help me? And is it even accurate? And how do we trust that information? So For the purposes of this audience who's concerned about optimizing their biology and optimizing their health and lifestyle, can you, as the owner of SelfDecode and your platform, say with some reasonable level of confidence that certain variants influence specific things that we can act upon, like your recovery or how you train or what you eat?
To be very honest, I don't think I could go through it, but fitness is probably okay. So you can make actions for everything related to genetics. There's always something you could do, meaning like it's giving you information. And if you have good genetic software, then it'll give you good information. But it's not going to tell you exactly which exercise you need to do. If you need to do more forearm, training, or it's not going to tell you.
That'd be
Like there's
incredible.
just not like it's
Just
not
have
going
a
to tell
robot
you.
tell you everything you need to do. Yeah.
Right. It's not going to tell you if you need to stretch, 5 minutes instead of 10. Right. It can't get that exact. Right. So you got to understand what it can or cannot tell you.
Mhm.
In general, though, the predictions, you got to understand there's also a hierarchy. It's not necessarily something's wrong or right. There's a hierarchy of how accurate something is depending on the topic. When governments spend billions of dollars to build up databases, disease databases, and to predict things, they make these databases available so that companies and academics can actually train their models on diseases. And so diseases in genetics, you can actually predict reasonably well because there's been a lot of money pumped into it. There hasn't been a lot of money pumped into how much, like in the nutrition stuff, as much.
Mhm.
So it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that it's not as accurate as the disease stuff. And even with disease stuff, there's things that are just going to be more genetic and things that are going to be less genetic.
Yeah.
Prostate cancer and cardiovascular disease are pretty genetic. And it's also very predictable. Whether you're going to get prostate cancer, cardiovascular, these are type 2 diabetes, also very predictable. So there's like a lot of this, there's about, I would say there's about 150 conditions that we can predict reasonably well.
Mhm.
That if you have high risk, you probably want to do something about it. There's some change you're going to want to make. That is one way to look at genetics, where you look at a total risk. So I think it's a good idea to go through the different kinds of genetics, because it's not just one thing. There's the polygenic risk scoring genetics, which is useful in the sense of if you want to know what you're at high risk for. And typically there's ways to reduce the risk, whether it's prostate cancer or anything, cardiovascular. There's always hundreds of things you could do to reduce your risk if you know exactly what you need to prevent. So, just for prostate cancer, for example, tomatoes and lycopene, that helps prevent prostate cancer. It's one thing. There's many things, green tea, different things. There's some supplements, like there's a whole bunch of different things you could do potentially to prevent prostate cancer. I wouldn't say that these things are a treatment. If you have prostate cancer, you take lycopene, your prostate cancer is going to go away. It doesn't really work like that, right? But for prevention, it makes more sense. Like I wouldn't say if I had prostate cancer, I'm not going to be like, well, I'm going to eat tomatoes and this is going to go away. But if you're eating tomatoes over many, many years and you're taking supplements, then it can push that off for like 20, 40 years, right? Like enough so that it's not relevant, because you could live to 100, 120, whatever the technology we have at that point is, and it's not going to be as relevant. So you want to push it off as much as you can, and none of the nutrition and supplement stuff are going to make you live past 120. I think 120 is something that maybe you can get to with all the latest and greatest supplements and drugs and lifestyle stuff. But then after that, it's kind of just like, we need to replace your limbs and shit.
Cyborg.
Exactly. So, but that's one thing that genetics can do. It can help predict diseases pretty well. And yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. No, let's compartmentalize here, because early on, your first answer, you were talking about the polygenic nature of some of these and how sometimes it's hundreds, if not thousands of genes that come together, maybe millions, whatever. And I remember reading recently, they discovered all the genes that comprise stuttering, whether somebody stutters, and it was like 40 something, genes that they identified.
That makes sense.
Right?
That makes sense. I mean, at least, yeah.
But then I also have heard, like, for Alzheimer's risk, there are those that there's like one snip or two snips that can give you a big indicator. No, it's not true, right? That's wrong.
Millions.
Yeah. Okay.
Alzheimer's is millions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where the misinformation is. And then when you mentioned lifestyle, you mentioned tomatoes for prostate cancer, my mind always goes to the hierarchy of things you do in your lifestyle. In other words, you wouldn't want somebody to say, well, the answer is the tomatoes, more like that is going to nudge things in the right direction, but you still should be doing other things. I also think there's something every human should be doing, no matter what, for a healthy lifestyle that probably also reduce the risk of all of these things. If that makes sense. Like strength training, muscle centric medicine is, I know, a hot topic term today. Mental health, right? I read about the link between depression and diseases of or dementia related, Alzheimer's and age related dementia, right? And so there's like a cascade of connections between these things as well. Where am I going with all this is how do we get people to know what they should do no matter what versus how they should target in on the things that are most important to them and then make these changes like eating more tomatoes?
Well, I think the things that first of all, I think people need like motivation. There's some things we will tell you that strength training or some kind of aerobic exercise is associated with lower risk of prostate cancer or whatever it is, right? And does repeat itself a lot. So there are certain things that everybody knows and sometimes people don't do, but you might sometimes need some more motivation to understand why exactly you need to do this, right? When it comes to these recommendations, like you said, you're going to be at risk for, let's say, 20 different conditions or whatever, right? You're not going to take a supplement for every condition necessarily. But what we can do is we look at all these conditions, all your blood tests, and we can tell you like a best fit. This thing is going to help you with the most things that you have issues with, the most risks that you have, including you're also able to put in symptoms, conditions, and goals. We could take all that into account. And then we give you the whole list for whatever we recommend. We say, here's all the reasons why you should take it. So it gives you a very clear rationale about all the reasons you should take it with the references. So I don't think all because you have a high risk for one condition that you need to take every supplement to prevent that condition.
Mm-hmm.
But it should nudge you in the right way. And then the question is, okay, well, you need to be nudged in different ways based on all these different information. And so you need software to put that all together for you and tell you what you should be what's the most important thing for you that's going to help with the most of things and the most important things.
Yeah,
So that's kind of how we make recommendations. It's by nudging things higher up on the priority list. So if you have a specific variant, it'll nudge it up a little bit for a certain condition. And then if you have a risk for that condition, it'll nudge it up in the list. If it's a serious condition, it'll nudge it more. Kind of, it goes on like that. So, and then, if you have a symptom, condition, or goal, it'll nudge it up significantly more if it helps with that. So then once it'll see the whole picture, like, whoa, okay, this thing helps with all these different things, my labs and this, and it gives you a much bigger picture. It lets you see, wow, okay, now I see why I need to take this, not because some guru told me necessarily, to do this. And you could also see for certain things that everybody knows they should be doing. Exercise, you could see all the different reasons why you should. And typically if someone says they exercise already, we hide these kinds of recommendations because they get pissed when they see exercise as a recommendation. They're like, I already know I need to, I already do it. So that's
No, I like that. That's the essence of personalization. I think the word personalization gets overused in the industry, and people are like, "Yeah, we personalize the program to you. Give us your age, your height, your demographics, and we'll give you a template." That's
exactly.
Right? And what you're doing is you're personalizing the output based on collecting all this data, letting using Power Assist and tools, of course, to interpret it, and then linking it to what you've validated is worth going after. So my question then is, I think you personally take a ton of supplements. Do you have we validated that the supplements themselves or these recommendations will actually do the thing? Is the data just as strong behind those behavior and supplement type recommendations as the genetic root cause is? Does that make sense? Is it validated as well?
Okay, so it's not there's we validated the prediction as it's a good prediction in terms of it can predict these kinds of conditions in the future. Meaning it's predicting that you have a high risk. So not everybody's going to get it. Still probability. Again, it's depending on how healthy you live and all these other factors. But the genetic part we know is true in the sense you have a high genetic risk. So we're clear about that. That's been validated. The other stuff, like, does this recommendation work? It's very hard to validate that because what we can show you is all the rationale as to why it's being recommended, which is what we do. And then you can choose if you want to take it or not. Right? You can't validate, that something we're recommending is going to prevent. It's already validated that there's studies showing that something helps with prevent prostate cancer. So we're not doing the validation for that, or at least there's studies related to that. But what we're doing is we're just putting that information together for you,
Mhm.
so that you can then make a decision. Does this thing make sense for me given all this information? And then you could either do it or not, right? So I
Sure.
wouldn't say that that's like, yeah, you can't really validate that per se, but that's why we give you all the rationale, so that you can make an intelligent decision and be like, okay, I think this makes sense or not.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense, man. And I'm just clarifying for the listeners so they understand there's like different systems being put together here, right? There's the genetic analysis, and then there's, okay, we have epidemiology, we have maybe random controlled trials, and maybe we have a bunch of, rat studies, whatever, behind all the other information we think we know about the supplementation, the lifestyle changes and whatnot. And that, because that's another area rife for misinformation. I'm sure you agree. It's like,
Right. Hmm.
so then if you do recommend all of these things, let's say it's a ton of different supplementation, does it reconcile interactions and dosing and all of that to
Hmm.
make sure that the totality makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, it does give you dosing, standard dosing. It doesn't change the dosing based on it, just because there's too many unknowns
Hmm.
there, but it
Hmm.
just tells you what is the best thing for, like, it prioritizes what's the most important thing for you. What are
Cool.
the most important things? And then you could keep going down the list and see, like, okay, so here's my top 10, top 15, top 20. You can just keep going down and see what makes sense for you to do.
Cool. And going back to the genetic variations, I know you mentioned it's very hard, it's very infrequent that you're going to have like one gene that's going to affect a clear outcome. There's something called the speed gene, I think, ACTN3. I was looking up just some genes to ask you about, and this is one that has to do with fast twitch muscle fibers. If you take that example, right, how actionable is something like that? Like if you know for a fact, because there's certain things I've seen with other services, they'll say, okay, you're a morning person versus a night person, so you need to go to bed earlier or later. Or, you burn carbs better than you burn fat. And I'm always skeptical of those conclusions. So what are your thoughts on that?
I don't personally know what to do with the fast twitch fiber one. Like, what are you going to do with that information? I
I
mean,
train
we have it,
differently. I
but
don't know. Yeah.
I don't
Higher
know if
reps
I would
versus lower
train
reps. I
differently.
have no idea.
I don't think I would train. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's specific things, like, I don't think you're going to figure out higher reps versus lower reps based on your genetics,
You just got to
really. Like,
train and
there's
figure it
not,
out, right? Because that's the advice I would give is you're going to
yeah.
figure it out when you
Yeah.
train. Yeah. Yeah.
What you could do is, like, let's say it could tell you what your natural VO2 max tendency is, and then it could give you ways to improve your VO2 max. And
Cool.
some of those improvements could be genetic based. So then there is specific variants that, if we know that you already have an issue, and we could say, we can make it. Sometimes there's studies that show that if you have this predisposition, or if you do this when you have high LDL cholesterol, it'll bring down your cholesterol more if you take this drug or this supplement or something like that. So there are studies done like that, and we put that in the software. Also, there's other things that, if we see a supplement works in a certain pathway, we will say that this thing can help you. You have this pathway that is higher risk, and this thing could help with that. Or, for example, if we see you have a predisposition for lower vitamin C, and vitamin C is related to some condition like low vitamin C, we could say that, put it up higher on the list and say, because you have this predisposition. So that's all explained. So there's kind of like the macro picture, which I think is important for genetics. You want to see what you're at risk for. And then there's like going into the details, where sometimes you might change up a recommendation for something. Like, you might try something else first, like
Mhm.
acne could be from like 20 different causes. So this is an example. My girlfriend had some acne, and I gave her some general stuff, and that helped, but not completely. And then we were trying different things, and I was actually waiting for a genetic test, because I thought that would help, to see if it's actually genetic or not. Turns out it's not. And she said nobody in her family has it. So
Mhm.
it's like something that's not genetic with her. And I also saw it wasn't like I was already suspecting that it was hormonal, but we didn't have the data for it. Now we see that it's not genetic, and it actually does. And the doctor told her he thought it was hormonal as well. Like, she does have higher testosterone levels for a girl. So, for example, that could be a reason why a girl has acne, right? Or it could be from many, many other reasons,
Mhm.
different kinds of acne. But this is an example where also genetics can sometimes help you figure out, like, hey, is if it is genetic, then there's other things to do about it, right? If it's not genetic, if it's more environmental because you just have some elevated hormone, then there's going to be other things.
Mhm.
If it's genetic, it usually means there's multiple biochemical pathways at work, and you kind of need to do a bunch of things. But then when you do that, it will help. If it's specific, if it's an environmental thing, it's usually something very specific that's causing it. It could just be a specific hormone, it could be a specific thing. Then if you do other things, it's just not going to help as much because you just didn't do the exact thing that you needed to do. So that also is a method where you could use genetics to help. And then I would say that there is a functional way to use genetics as well, and I want to get into that. The functional way is you're looking at. So we do have this approach, for example, where okay, so we look at pathways. For example, we have a methylation detox pathway, histamine pathway, and what we do there, I think it's reasonably good actually. So what we do there is we will look at all the genes in a given pathway, so methylation. So we're already narrowing down to something specific. You take what are the main genes with methylation? So there's about 30 different genes of methylation. We see how does it relate. We make a diagram. We see all the different SNPs within a gene, and anytime, like if overall you have risk in a gene, it will light up red. So you could see the pathway as a whole, and then we can give you we give recommendations based on the pathway as a whole. And I think that could be useful in you do need like a provider sometimes, or you need to be a nerd to like really read. But I do think the pathways, I looked at the report, like when we're designing it, sometimes we don't know exactly like I don't know how my results are going to be, but when I like plug it in, I'm like it's pretty good in terms of the recommendations and showing what are all the things in the path, like things I wouldn't be able to figure out if not seeing a diagram. So we have the pathway reports. Unfortunately, the other companies do not do a comprehensive job at these pathway reports. And so, again, it falls short with what they're doing. Even within this approach, they're not doing a good job. And then there's like the Gary Brecka DNA company kind of approach where they're looking at, I don't know, like 5 SNPs to the DNA company, 83 SNPs. And they're trying to make very broad conclusions based on you know, basically the whole 10x health report is if you have MTHFR or not. The other stuff is just not significant enough. It's like, do you have MTHFR? Yes or no? And we will test it. Like you can get that from any DNA test pretty much. But they're just overcharging you for it. Like you can do our test for $600, get, thousands of reports and all this kind of advanced tech. Or you could do theirs for $600 and you just get MTHFR. So it's like, and in ours, you'll get MTHFR as well. That's what I mean by it's a scam in the sense that they're really, like MTHFR is an important gene. Everybody should know it if they have like these variants, but it's just kind of like overemphasis on one gene.
Yeah.
Right. There's
Yeah.
many other important genes. And like you said, ApoE is important. You should know it. BRCA is important. These are
Mhm.
important genes, not saying not. But the problem is that first of all, if you don't have ApoE, you could still have high risk for Alzheimer's. And if you do have ApoE, you can have low risk. You really have to look at the many of the genes, right?
Right.
So that's where the problem comes in when you try to look at specific genes. Even the most significant ones out there, it's still not going to give you an accurate prediction. But now when you get to the functional ones, when you exclude MTHFR, the functional ones are usually much less predictive of anything.
And yet the functional ones, like you said, that really got my, nerd brain going as an engineer of like imagining a dashboard up on a, in a control room, right? Where you see the chain of events and you see the feedback loop and everything connected. And you're trying to identify that chain of events genetically and where things are hung up or at high risk. Are you able to, like you mentioned, the methylation pathway, are you able to combine that with then say blood work, lab work? Because I've heard you talk on other shows about, it's not just genetics. We also have the whole health side of the marker analysis. Combine those to also do a before and after when you make a change. Because that's the other thing I'm wondering about is, okay, you've done these things. Now, how do you get an after? Because your genes don't change. So what does change and can you measure that? So that's what comes to mind for me right now.
Yeah, you can do blood tests on everything. So what we do is anytime we have a report, let's say if I have higher risk for cardiovascular disease, right? We will tell you all the different blood tests that are related to cardiovascular disease. And then what you can upload it. You buy the test, you upload it, whether it's from us or not, it doesn't matter. You get the test, you upload it, and then we can tell you which ones are increasing your risk, which ones are decreasing your risk. And so then you could focus, and we tell you each one how to reduce the risk for the marker. So once you know that you're at high risk for cardiovascular disease, first of all, some people maybe would want to start taking statins. We'll tell you, we have a pharmacogenomics report to see, are you going to get muscle pain from statins? For me, it says I do get muscle pain. And I'm an experimenter. So I'm like, let me see. I'm going to see. Most people, I don't think, want to do that, right? They're not going to do what I'm doing just to experiment for the science purpose. But I took it and I got very severe muscle pain.
Interesting.
But and also, yeah, so there's kind of like, there's like the pharmacogenomics part of it, which is pretty good. And then there's the so you could see that if you do have specific variants, pharmacogenomics is typically have a specific variant, you're going to do worse or better with a drug. That does have an influence. I'm not saying not. The problem with some of the supplements are sometimes there's studies, a lot of times there's not. But even then, it's not going to say to take a drug or not. If you just get your pharmacogenomics report, you still need to see, are you at risk for the condition, right? Like you still have to see a lot more information. So you really need a very robust, comprehensive platform. But yeah, so let's say someone has cardiovascular disease. If you also you could have the risk from genetics, but you might have low cholesterol. I mean, it's still high risk. It's actually what the recent study found in a top journal that we didn't publish this one, but we have our own studies that we publish on our results, which shows that we have the best results. But when we benchmark it, but this study was just showing that cardiovascular disease in genetics, if you have a high polygenic risk score for cardiovascular, it's actually more important than pretty much any other risk factor that you can have. Blood pressure, cholesterol, it's like pretty much tied with like blood pressure, which is pretty huge. So, but it's more important than cholesterol, than high cholesterol or any of these other markers that you might have, even like inflammation. Just when they look at all the different things, if you have a high polygenic risk score, it just comes to the top. This is the most significant thing in terms of risk. Now, what you can do under that circumstance is make sure all the other markers are low risk, and also do certain things that prevent cardiovascular disease in general. There's a whole bunch of stuff you could do. And so that's what I did. I just make sure I do have a high risk of coronary artery disease in my genetics. And I just make sure that I've got low risk in all of the labs that are related to cardiovascular disease. So I can see that it's changing. The labs get better. It's high risk, then it goes to low risk, right? And so you can change these things.
My name is Tony. I'm a strength lifter in my 40s. And I'd just like to say thank you to Phil and his Wits and Weights community for helping me learn more about nutrition and how to implement better ideas into my strength training. Phil has a very, very good understanding of macros and chemical compounds and hormones and all that. And he's continuously learning. And that's what I like about Phil. He's got a great sense of humor. We'll go back and forth. He's very relaxed, very easy to talk to. One of the greatest things about Phil, in my view, is that he practices what he preaches. He also works out with barbells. He trains heavy, not as heavy as me, but he trains heavy. He lifts, so he knows programs. He knows different variations. So if you talk with him about getting in better shape or eating better, he's probably going to give you some good advice, and I would strongly recommend you talk with him, and he'll help you out. Thanks.
Yeah, man, I get so many questions. I could talk to you for hours, to be honest, because I'm like, what do I focus in on? Cardiovascular disease. We talk about that a lot on the show in the context of obesity, lifestyle, and also how age-related disease has evolved over humanity's existence, right? Like at one point, we didn't see any of these diseases. And even things like type 2 diabetes, we used to call it adult onset, and now it's in children, right? Because of lifestyle. And so that brings up the question of epigenetics. Like if you went to Homo sapiens 20,000 years ago and did a genetic test, would they have a risk of cardiovascular disease still? Or has that been bred into us via more recent modern man's lifestyle? You know what I mean? Like those questions come to mind.
No, they've always had, the risk was always there. The genetic risks are always there.
Got it. Yep.
And people could die from a heart disease even if they live a very natural lifestyle,
True.
right?
Yes. Hmm.
It's even if they live a very healthy lifestyle. And then the question is how long you're gonna die from heart disease at some age, no matter what, right? Maybe if you live to 100, maybe if it's 90, some people 35, right? Like if they're very young. So what, living like an unhealthy lifestyle is could make someone get heart disease at 70 or 60 instead of 90 or 80. But what I'm saying is that, now, so if you don't have genetic risk, you'll still get heart disease, but the question is when.
Hmm.
And if you have a high genetic risk, it's going to be 20 years earlier, let's say. And so if you have a high genetic risk and you don't eat healthy, you can get a heart, like people were dying from heart disease all the time, like
Yeah.
earlier ages. And then, throughout history.
Yeah, no, what you're saying makes sense in terms of the risk versus when you would get it and whether it's inevitable. And we see a correlation, right, with lifestyle and obesity and that going up because of the reason you said. It's you're accelerating the process. So another one related to this comes up is autoimmune conditions. I've had a lot of clients have had different autoimmune conditions, from lupus to rheumatoid arthritis to, undifferentiated things that they show up in their lab work, right? They have the antibodies for it. They may or may not have the diagnosis. And there are obviously different medications, and there's, what do you call it, biologics today, like Dupixent and things like that, that can deal with those. But one of the recommendations for certain autoimmune conditions is elimination diets, because there's something that is triggering, right, the inflammation in your food. How does that fit into all of this in terms of, the recommendations? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I might be the only person in the world. I'm definitely the only person I know have heard of. I used to be on a carnivore diet. I could only eat meat. If I ate anything else, I get like brain fog, pains, like fibromyalgia, like just everything,
Mm.
every random issue my body would just start going,
So if you had
haywire.
an apple, like it would be a problem? Like if
Yeah.
you just anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
If I ate an apple, I start getting like tired, like, oh,
Interesting.
I can't think. I don't know what's going on. My brain slows down.
Okay.
Like I get a food coma from a fucking apple, literally. And I get bloated and like it's like, wow, I ate a fucking apple and now I'm bloated. I can't think, unmotivated. I'm like, it's as if maybe someone else ate like a heavy pasta, huge heavy
Sure.
pasta. And then, and they're like, oh, like you get a little, how you get a little
Oh yeah,
brain
I know.
fog.
Or drink wine, like when I drink wine or something like that. Yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was like I would eat an apple and that would happen,
Okay.
right? I'd be like, what the fuck's going on? Now, if I eat something else like a bread, I'd be out for like days. So I basically just like at a certain point, I figured out in 2013 already that I need to go on this diet that doesn't have any, like, it's just meat and chicken, beef, chicken, and like really clean salmon. And that's it. That's all I ate. Like wild Alaskan frozen salmon.
Crazy.
Just warm it up and like no spices, nothing, like just very plain, just beef. And I would just, I would melt down from everything. Now I can eat anything, bread, gluten, everything, literally everything. And the way I did that was reverse all my food sensitivities. It was actually somewhat gradual, but it was also pretty, like there was things that I figured out, oh, I got to do this. And then it just made a huge difference. And now I could just eat anything. So we were talking about so number one is in my results come up that I have a high risk of food sensitivities and also food allergies. But what we see is that I also reversed it. So I had it from a young age already. I remember as long as I can remember, I would get tired from eating like bread or any kind of, any carbohydrates and then now I don't. Now I could eat anything, cheese, dairy, milk, whatever, you name it. It doesn't matter if it's A2, A1, A this, gluten, whatever. Doesn't make a difference.
That's a big business right there. There's a lot of people
It
who
is. Yeah.
have issues with food. Yeah.
And I noticed that everybody has some issues with food. And it's more of a problem that as you get older, you lose tolerance to foods. And it's also there's also a degree of, like, if you have a reaction 10% or 20% or 100%, you just get like out of commission. Like two people could have a food coma, one gets like maybe 5% tired, but they're still able to work and do whatever. The other person gets slammed the
Hmm.
whole day, they can't function. And you see that even people who are like beasts, all they eat a pasta in the morning, a lot of them are just like, oh, I'm fucked. So they don't do that. They'll just kind of like, a lot of people do intermittent fasting because they kind of know they'll eat something, though it slows them down. Food is not supposed to slow you down,
Yeah, so they work
right?
around it by either starting to
Yeah,
restrict or to restrict the timing or whatever.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but if you know how to do it, and again, like the only way I figured it out was with precision health, then you could fix all these things. And same with any kind of issue. There's a way to fix all these things. It's just a question of, do you know the right way to do it? And unfortunately, charlatans are taking it over by saying, we're going to test 5 SNPs and tell you everything you need to know. Like if you got anxiety, you got MTHFR. Let me explain to this to you. It's like this is your whole world. You're like, whoa, I can do this test.
It
It's
sounds
going to
so
tell me. It's
simple,
like,
doesn't it?
right. It's so simple. It's just,
Yeah.
let me tell you something. It's MTHFR. And it's like,
It's the
so
secret.
we do have all these functional reports, by the way. One of the things we did was we just replicated every one of these other companies so that if you're like curious, oh, I want this 10x report, we're like, let's make this better so that it's not complete shit, and then call it something else, 100x, whatever, right? We
I
call
get
it
it. I
different
get
names.
it, man.
Yeah.
So wait,
And it's like, yeah.
before we get off the food thing, because I know we're almost out of time, is like just give me one example of how one of the foods you were intolerant to, how you overcame that. Like now I'm really curious about that.
For me, with food intolerance is not one reason why you're intolerant to food. And it's
Mhm.
very kind of, I would say that I figured things out over time, but there was a very big acceleration. So I figured things out from 15 years ago already, but there was a very big acceleration in the past couple of years because of how intelligent the software and just precision health has become, like more accessible to blood tests, better software. So in the past 3.5 years, think about it like this: like I reduced the food sensitivities, but it was at a point where my diet was like I could eat vegetables and fruits, and so it was like, okay, I'm not just eating meat and beef, right? Like I'll eat, and then I was kind of eating some fruit, nuts and seeds sometimes, but then I just figured out one thing at a time. Boom, 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 boom. Just, and like each thing I figured out, I was like, whoa, the sensitivities went down more. 80%, 90%. Now I can eat this. I eat avocados. I remember just reacting to every single food. I eat avocados, boom. And then like 2 years ago, I would not react to 60% of foods, then 70, 80%. And as I did more and more things, just now I'm just like, I can eat whatever I want. Like now I've got the least restrictions, like people are like, oh, I can't eat this or else. Like if I eat pizza now, I'm fine. I don't have a food
Nice.
coma, right?
Nice.
Which would be anathema. Like, forget about pizza. I couldn't eat an apple.
Yeah. No, that apple, man.
Forget about. I couldn't eat a fucking tomato.
Yeah.
Forget about an apple.
And the reason this is important, right, is because at the end of the day, we want people to live their lives and enjoy food. I mean, food is good, right? And there's too much fear mongering around it. And some of it may come from a legitimate place, but it's generalized and it's marketed as if like, this is the diet, this is the perfect diet. And we talk about restriction versus like flexible, personalized restraint. Like you want to have flexibility, you want to have some level of restraint in your diet depending on your goal, but then also hopefully you can eat whatever the heck you want if that's a food you enjoy, and there's a way to get there. So this is awesome, man. I mean, I know we just scratched the surface. Folks can find a lot of your content, but where do we want to send them to learn more about your work right away?
I would say SelfDecode or Mr. Biohacker on Instagram. There's some content there. And I think it's important to understand really like genetics is huge, huge power. And precision health in general is very significant. The problem nowadays is it's just going to the person who markets it the best, which is an issue, right? And what are these people going to say? They're going to say that I've spoken to some of these people, most of them. I'm like, you guys realize like what's going like. They usually will bury their head in the sand, but also they're going to be like, oh, we're just looking at the functional genes. And so number one is we do that. We can do that. We do that, right? So that if somebody wants that, it's like, here you go. But the problem is it just doesn't, like, if you can't just make predictions based on specific variants, even though they're going to tell you, oh, it's all validated, by the way. That word validation could mean two very different things, right? What they're saying is that there's some kind of study that shows an association between a gene, a SNP, and a condition. The problem is that that association might exist, but it wouldn't exist across all different ancestries. It might not be replicatable. Now, let's say it is replicatable. The effect size is so small that you would need to add up hundreds of genes in order to get something significant. So the problem is the effect size. But, we do still allow people to use genetics in that way, because I think sometimes if you want to play detective, you could pick up interesting insights here and there by looking at these genes. And so we just do everything. We've become like the everything platform. And part of the reason we also do everything is because we also license out the technology to other businesses.
Okay.
So it's basically whatever we get a request for, or if another company's doing something, it's like, we can do that too. Not a problem. Here it is, right? Like, so we just have like kind of a smorgasbord of everything you could do with genetics. And I would, and whatever someone wants, you can do, right? Like, it's like, you want this gene? You got it. What do you want? Tell us the genes. We make like custom reports, whatever you want. If you wanted to make a wits and weights genetic report, we can make one for you. You just tell us the topics, whatever you want in there, we put it in there.
Love it, man. Love it, man. Yeah, I'm all about data. Like you said, it's you can't really have too much. It's just, can you make sense of it? And with the power of what we have now with tools and AI and what you guys are doing and the validation, I think that's awesome. People listening are going to be really curious to learn more about this. So we'll send them to selfdecode.com and check out Joe on IG at Mr. Biohacker. And Joe, man, thanks for your time. Thanks for coming on and sharing this. I'm glad we had you to discuss the future of health and medicine and all of this today.
Appreciate it. And one last tip is, you could also upload your lab tests. For me, it's like a game I play. Can I move my lab results? And what's amazing is that you can move every single lab result. It's unbelievable.
Nice. And then so you can interpret the before and after per the question I had earlier, right? And see what you've done. So that's what it's all about.
Exactly.
Yeah, you gotta change you have to have data that's actionable that you could make a change from and then be able to measure that.
Every lab test, every single blood test you take, you can alter.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's in your control, folks. All right. Well, thanks for coming on, Joe.
Thanks for having me.